The operating room was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead mixing with a steady beeping of monitors. Nurse Emily Johnson adjusted her mask and gloves, her palms damp with anticipation. It was her first solo night shift assisting in major surgeries, and the air was thick with a scent of antiseptic and steel. Michael Parker, a 34-year-old man with a routine appendectomy ahead of him, lay under the bright glare of the surgical lights, his chest rising and falling with a slow, steady rhythm of anesthesia. Emily's heart pounded in her ears as she picked up the scalpel, her mind running through every step she had practiced countless times. Everything seemed normal. Everything felt predictable, until it wasn't. Midway through the incision, Emily felt it first as a subtle resistance, then the impossible. The scalpel lifted ever so slightly, gliding across the sterile drape without her touch. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. The OR seemed to hold its collective breath. Dr. Lee, the chief surgeon, leaned in, eyes focused on the procedure, but even she paused, sensing the shift in the room. Emily's mind raced. Was it her hand shaking? A trick of the light? Yet every instinct screamed that this was something else, something beyond explanation. The metallic blade reflected the harsh overhead lights as if it had its mind of its own, moving with deliberate precision, and then it stopped. Time seemed to slow. The faint hum of the lights became louder in Emily's ears, each beep of the heart monitor like a drum echoing her mounting panic. She tried to steady herself, to convince her mind that this was impossible, yet every nerve in her body insisted she had seen the truth. Her colleagues glanced at one another, uncertain, whispering the tiniest reassurances, but the air was thick with tension, charged with the unspoken acknowledgement that something had just breached the ordinary, something no protocol could explain. Emily's thoughts flickered to Michael, asleep and vulnerable beneath the surgical drapes. How could a simple tool, something she had trusted her entire career, act with willful independence? Fear and responsibility collided in her chest, each beat a reminder that lives hung in balance. The sterile room felt suddenly alive, every gleam of steel and glass carrying an unfamiliar weight, an invisible presence hovering just beyond comprehension. She fought the instinct to look away, to escape, but she couldn't. Something had already embedded itself in her consciousness, a whisper of doubt and awe she could not shake. And then, everything changed. The scalpel, still seemingly guided by an unseen hand, slid again, just enough to nick the edge of the sterile drape. The sound, subtle, yet impossible to ignore, echoed like a sharp intonation through the room. Emily's breath caught, a soft gasp barely audible over the monitors. Dr. Lee's eyes widened, the team's movement slowed, each member caught between disbelief and professional composure. In that instant, the ordinary rhythm of the OR shattered, replaced by a quiet, unnameable tension that pressed against Emily's mind. She knew she would never forget this moment. Not the way the metal glinted under the lights, not the way the room seemed to bend towards something unknown, not the way she questioned everything she thought she understood about reality. It was supposed to be just another appendectomy. Instead, it had become the beginning of a mystery that would haunt her and everyone in that room for years to come. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she laid the scalpel down, but her eyes remained fixed on Michael, on the fragile line between life, medicine, and the unexplainable. The first flicker of fear, wonder, and disbelief had ignited, and nothing could extinguish it. Michael Parker wasn't just another patient charted on a clipboard. He was a man who had lived under the shadow of his own body's unpredictability for years. At 34, he had built a career as a software engineer, yet his life was punctuated by sudden collapses that left colleagues frightened and friends baffled. One moment, he would be standing at his desk, typing an email, and the next, his legs would betray him, sending him crumpling to the cold floor. Nights were often worse. Alone in his apartment, he would wake drenched in sweat, numbness creeping through his limbs as if some invisible force had gripped him, leaving him paralyzed and gasping for breath. Doctors had run test after test, MRIs, CT scans, EEGs, countless blood panels, but every result returned normal. Every diagnosis seemed to slip just out of reach. Emily had first encountered Michael only through the pages of his medical history. His file was thick with notes, fainting episodes, unexplained paralysis, occasional migraines that doubled him over, and one mention of a near accident in his car when his right arm had suddenly gone limp. Reading it, Emily had felt a shiver run down her spine, a mix of professional curiosity and human empathy. It was impossible not to imagine the terror he must have felt, the vulnerability of waking up in a body that might betray him without warning. And now, as she stood in the operating room, scalpel in hand, that fear seemed to resonate in the very air around him, almost tangible. The connection she felt was subtle at first, an almost imperceptible intuition, but undeniable. Every small movement of the patient under anesthesia, the irregular heartbeat, the brief flicker of eyelids, felt charged with a quiet significance, as though his body somehow whispered warnings no machine could capture. Emily found herself watching the monitors, tracing the rise and fall of his vital signs, and wondering if the inexplicable movement of the scalpel was linked to the fragile and unpredictable rhythm of Michael's body. Could his history of mysterious paralysis, the sudden flickers of life and immobility, have some unseen influence on the OR that night? The narration here should linger on the human element. Michael wasn't just a subject of curiosity. He was a man who had lived under the shadow of his own body's unpredictability for years. His life had been punctuated by moments that defied understanding, leaving him to navigate a world that often seemed indifferent to his struggles. Emily, mute to the realities of surgical care, felt that weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. For the first time, she realized that medicine was not just about technique, charts, or procedures. It was about people, about their fragile humanity, and the mysteries that no textbook could explain. As the aura light reflected off the sterile surfaces, Emily couldn't help but feel that Michael's fragile existence somehow echoed in the scalpel's sudden, unbidden movement. The line between science and something else, something unknown, something unmeasurable, felt thinner than ever. She would later describe it as a moment when her training, her logic, and her understanding of the human body all collided with the inexplicable, leaving her suspended between fear and awe. And in that suspended moment, the story of Michael Parker became more than a medical case. It became a haunting mystery that would shadow Emily's career and challenge the very limits of her understanding of life, the body, and the unknown. Emily Johnson's early days on the surgical floor had been a whirlwind of adrenaline, precision, and learning curve steep enough to leave even the most resilient nurse questioning herself. The OR was a world governed by rules, checklists, and unwavering routines. But for Emily, cracks had begun to appear, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Instruments would sometimes shift ever so slightly, just a millimeter or two, catching her eye and making her pause. She would blink, convinced she had imagined it, only to see the stainless steel glint differently a heartbeat later, as if it had moved with intention. She confided quietly in colleagues, and some shared stories of their own, a clamp that seemed to jump from tray to table, a suction tip that would roll toward an incision without explanation. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices tinged with nervous laughter and a shared unease, as though saying the words out loud would make the phenomenon real. There were patients, too, that added to Emily's unease. One elderly man had described the sensation of someone watching him even while under anesthesia, his eyes darting beneath closed lids, fingers trembling despite muscle relaxants. Another woman, recovering from a minor procedure, had insisted she had felt the instruments moving on their own, brushing her skin ever so slightly, though Emily knew that nothing should have caused such contact. These were moments Emily tried to explain scientifically. Air currents, muscle spasms, optical illusions, but the frequency and consistency of the occurrences refused simple reasoning. It was as though the OR itself held a memory, an energy that defied medical logic, and Emily, new to the floor, felt its pull most acutely. The atmosphere of the hospital at night contributed to the sensation, amplifying the tiniest anomaly into something monumental. Shadows stretched across the walls as the harsh fluorescent lights fought against the darkness, glinting off trays of instruments with a cold metallic sheen. Emily remembered walking alone down the empty corridors, the soft echo of her footsteps mingling with the distant hum of machines, and feeling eyes on her where none could be. Staff whispers spoke of rooms with their own will, of tools that had histories beyond the sterile documentation in supply logs. These conversations, though casual and often dismissed as superstition, resonated with Emily, a seed of doubt and wonder growing in her mind. And Emily's reflections began to shift the way she perceived the OR entirely. Routine procedures became exercises in heightened awareness. Every beep, every shadow, every tiny tremor magnified. The surgical instruments no longer seemed inert. They were actors in a theater whose script she could not read. Her curiosity mingled with fear, each case leaving her more acutely attuned to the anomalies that had been once easy to ignore. And yet there was also a
strange allure, an irresistible pull toward understanding the unexplained. Was it her imagination? Was it something physiological she could not yet measure? Or was there something else, an unseen presence or consciousness that brushed against the boundaries of human perception? Small anecdotes from other staff only deepened the tension. A seasoned scrub nurse whispered of a scalpel that had fallen off the tray 3 times in a single procedure, always landing inches from the patient, never clattering, never explainable. Another surgeon swore he had felt a subtle resistance when attempting to make an incision, as if something were guiding or redirecting his hand. For Emily, these shared experiences were both comforting and terrifying. They proved she was not alone, yet they confirmed that the phenomena were real, defying every rule she had learned. The unease built gradually, like the slow tightening of a spring, until Emily could no longer separate rationality from the inexplicable. The OR had become a place of tension, awe, and lingering questions, each day leaving her more aware of forces that she could neither measure nor control. And in the back of her mind, a quiet, persistent thought began to take shape. If the instruments could move without touch, if patients could feel unseen presences, then perhaps the ordinary boundaries of medicine, life, and consciousness were not as fixed as she had always believed. The night of Michael Parker's surgery had arrived like any other, or so it seemed. Emily Johnson adjusted her mask, tightened her gloves, and took her place beside Dr. Susan Lee, the chief surgeon. The operating room was bathed in stark, clinical light, every surface gleaming with antiseptic precision. The rhythmic hum of the ventilator and the faint beeping of the heart monitor provided a hypnotic cadence, one that usually brought a sense of calm to even the most anxious staff. But for Emily, an undercurrent of unease hummed through her nerves, a subtle warning she couldn't shake. She gripped the scalpel, recalling the inexplicable movement she had witnessed before, and told herself firmly, "This is just a tool, inanimate, obedient to the hand that wields it." As the incision began, everything appeared routine. Michael's vitals were steady, anesthesia holding him in a delicate, controlled slumber. The surgical team moved with the fluid precision of rehearsed choreography, every instrument passing seamlessly from tray to hand. And then, without warning, the scalpel twitched. Emily's eyes widened. At first she thought her own grip had faltered, her hand trembling under the bright lights. But the movement was deliberate, almost sentient, sliding across the sterile drape with a precision that defied explanation. Time seemed to stretch. The metallic click of the scalpel, faint but unmistakable, echoed in the room like a soft alarm, cutting through the mechanical hum and rhythmic beeping. Emily froze, her breath caught behind her mask. Dr. Lee's hands hovered mid-air, the incision momentarily paused as the team collectively sensed the anomaly. Michael's vitals flickered, a sudden spike in heart rate that registered on the monitor as though his body had recognized the disruption before anyone else did. Emily's mind raced. Was it stress? A lapse in concentration? A gust of air from the ventilation system? No, it was different. The scalpel lifted again, hovering for a heartbeat, and then moved with an almost deliberate intent, cutting the edge of the drape in a motion both subtle and impossible. The room felt suspended in a suspended reality, each heartbeat and monitor beep amplified into a drumroll of tension. Emily's focus sharpened, paradoxically alert and terrified all at once. She could feel the weight of unseen eyes, as though the room itself were alive, watching, judging. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to stay in the moment, following the scalpel's erratic path, aware of every subtle reflection off the steel instruments, every glint in the overhead light. The metallic sheen seemed to flicker with a life of its own, as if the instruments were communicating, silently aware of the chaos unfolding in the human world beneath them. Michael's vitals spiked again, a rapid, uneven rhythm that mirrored Emily's own panic. Dr. Lee's voice, calm yet tense, cut through the room. "Steady. Keep going." But even as she spoke, her eyes betrayed disbelief. Emily felt the surreal weight of the moment pressing in from all sides, the sterile environment, the clinical efficiency of the team, and the undeniable, unexplainable movement of the scalpel. In that instant, the familiar world of medicine fractured. Logic and reason collided with the inexplicable, leaving Emily suspended in fear, wonder, and an urgent compulsion to understand what had occurred. Minutes passed like hours. Every movement of the scalpel was scrutinized, every sound amplified. The OR became a theater of tension, a space where life and mystery intersected in ways Emily had never imagined. When the scalpel finally settled, resting harmlessly on the tray, the room seemed to exhale collectively. Emily's hands trembled, her heart hammering against her chest. Michael, still under anesthesia, remained oblivious to the chaos that had brushed against the fragile boundary of his body and the instruments that touched it. And yet Emily knew something profound had occurred, something that no chart, protocol, or textbook could explain. The experience left her shaken, but also undeniably drawn to the mystery, compelled to investigate what had occurred beyond the veil of understanding. The surgical incident was no longer a single moment of fear. It had become the crucible in which her perception of medicine, life, and the unexplainable would forever be altered. In the quiet aftermath of the investigation, Emily Johnson found herself wandering the empty corridors of the hospital, the distant hum of machines echoing her thoughts. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by the metallic gleam of the scalpel and the impossible movement she had witnessed. Each memory of that night played over in her mind like a looping reel, her pulse racing, Dr. Lee's eyes wide with disbelief, Michael Parker's unconscious form beneath the surgical drapes. She questioned everything, her judgment, her perception, her very understanding of reality. Did she truly see the scalpel move on its own, or had stress and inexperience twisted her senses into imagining the impossible? But deep in her gut, she knew what she had seen.
Emily's doubt and fear were intertwined with a strange fascination. She replayed the moments of the operation, analyzing every detail, trying to find patterns, trying to rationalize the irrational. Walking through the empty ORs late at night, instruments lined neatly on trays, the metallic scent lingering in the air, she felt both vulnerable and acutely aware. The hospital, which had once felt predictable and orderly, now seemed alive with subtle energy, the echo of movements and sounds carrying meaning she could not decipher. She thought of Michael Parker, his fragile, unpredictable body, the faint tremors and spikes in vitals, the years he had spent living with uncertainty, and felt a profound empathy. His life had been one long negotiation with unpredictability. And somehow, in that OR, their paths had intersected in a moment that defied explanation. Meanwhile, Michael's recovery was uneventful in the clinical sense. Yet, Emily couldn't shake the subtle traces of strangeness. He mentioned dreams that felt intensely real, tingling sensations in his hands and feet, fleeting moments of déjà vu that left him unsettled. Each account added layers to Emily's growing sense that something more than medical science had brushed against them both. Their experiences, though separate, seemed linked by invisible threads woven through fear, consciousness, and the inexplicable. Emily often reflected on the delicate balance between life and observation, the thin line separating routine surgery from an encounter with the unknown. Professionally, the incident left Emily cautious, more alert, but also more empathetic. She approached patients with heightened awareness, observing subtle cues, listening more carefully to whispers of discomfort or anxiety, and acknowledging the unexplainable experiences that cannot fit neatly into charts or statistics. Emotionally, however, the event lingered like a shadow, reshaping her understanding of her role in the OR and the fragility of human perception. She realized that medicine, while grounded in science, cannot account for every phenomenon.
Some moments slip between the cracks, leaving traces of wonder and unease in their wake. In reflection, Emily recognized that the surgical incident was more than a single event. It was a pivot point in her life, a threshold into a world where the limits of perception, consciousness, and medicine intersected. She could not dismiss the experience, and she could not fully explain it. Instead, she carried it with her, a haunting reminder of the mysteries that lie just beyond understanding, urging her to remain both vigilant and open, grounded yet receptive. In the quiet spaces of the hospital, Emily and Michael's intertwined experiences continue to resonate, leaving a lingering awareness that some encounters transcend explanation and that life itself is far more mysterious than any protocol or procedure could contain. Time moved on, yet the memory of that night remained etched in Emily Johnson's consciousness. She continued her nursing career, her hands steady, but her mind forever alert to the subtle rhythms and anomalies of the operating room. The experience had left her changed, more perceptive, more reflective, and forever haunted by the unexplainable. Each patient she cared for, each scalpel she handled, carried with it the faint echo of that impossible moment, a reminder that not everything in medicine could be measured, cataloged, or explained. The hospital, once purely a place of science and procedure, had revealed itself as a theater where mystery lingered quietly beneath the clinical surface. Michael Parker recovered physically from the appendectomy, his life returning to a semblance of normalcy. But the intangible traces of the incident remained. He described fleeting sensations, dreams that felt vividly real, and moments of déjà vu that stirred a quiet unease. Even in his daily routines, he sometimes sensed the invisible threads connecting him to that night, the lingering presence of the inexplicable brushing against the edges of his awareness. Emily, aware of his experiences, could not help but wonder if their encounter had unlocked something neither science nor medicine could fully capture, a connection between consciousness, vulnerability, and the mysteries that hover just beyond perception. The OR, now quiet in the early morning light, held its usual sterile order, yet a subtle tension remained, as if the walls remembered. The scalpel rested untouched on the tray, sunlight filtering through blinds, reflecting off the steel in a way that seemed ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Machines hummed softly, monitors blinked rhythmically, and the hospital breathed on, unaware of the invisible stories etched into its space. The line between the known and the unknown remained fragile, the boundary between science and the unexplained unresolved. Emily's reflections lingered in the space between awe and humility. Some mysteries resist definition. Some moments, no matter how closely examined, defy the tools of human understanding. The scalpel, the OR, and the patient became symbols of that ineffable frontier, a reminder that life, consciousness, and perception are far more intricate and mysterious than any protocol could capture. As viewers, we are left with a haunting question. How much of the human experience exists beyond measurable reality, and what traces of the unexplained brush against us when we least expect it? The answer, it seems, may lie just beyond the edge of perception, in the quiet spaces between science, life, and the unknown.